The EU AI Act has been getting much interest, excitement, and fear all at the same time.
The EU AI Act is anticipated to be the highest bar AI regulation that we're going to see for a while. The deadlines are now ticking for organizations to get in compliance.
The EU AI Act has been getting much interest, excitement, and fear all at the same time.
Yep.
You actually recently hosted a webinar featuring one of the European Parliament members that actually was working on the EU AI Act. So I was wondering if you could discuss some of what your insights were from that panel, what you learned, what we should be thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start by saying that the EU AI Act is anticipated, like GDPR, to be sort of the most impactful and also, in many cases, highest bar AI regulation that we're going to see for a while. Like GDPR in the EU spawned copycat regulations all around the world and became sort of the de facto standard for evaluating compliance of your data privacy program. Similarly, we expect the EU AI Act to be the same. And so we've been tracking it very closely for many years now as it's gone through many iterations. And what our most recent webinar was really focused on was understanding the final version of the EU AI Act that now is officially on the books. It's in effect. The deadlines are now ticking for organizations to get in compliance. What does that look like? And what are the things that organizations should really keep in mind as they start to prepare to comply with this sweeping regulation? And I think there are a couple of really interesting things about the EU AI Act that I believe will set standards for AI regulation around the world. One is that the EU AI Act takes a use case based approach in addition to a technology approach. What that means is that different parts of the EU AI Act are going to apply to different AI systems based not only on the technical scope of those systems, but also the context of where and how they're being used. You're probably familiar, you've probably heard of the high risk, minimal risk, limited risk framework of the EU AI Act, the risk-based framework. That is purely based on context, based on where, how, and why you're using an AI system. And that's an approach that we're seeing copied in other regulations, even here in the US. The OMB guidance that was created based on President Biden's executive order about federal agency use of AI is also taking a use case based approach to governance. So that's a really important trend that is certainly still true in the final text compared to previous versions. I think the other really interesting thing to look at with the EU AI Act are the obligations to general purpose AI providers, otherwise known as foundation models or large language models. The EU AI Act took some criticism for sort of hurriedly adding components to the law that were going to be specific to general purpose AI systems, because the generative AI boom happened well after the EU AI Act had already been drafted and was going through the legislative process. But I actually think that there are some really interesting sort of standards that are established by the EU AI Act related to general purpose AI systems. One of them is related to sort of the size of the model being a core driver of whether it falls under governance requirements of the EU AI Act. We will see if that continues to be a regulatory trend or if there are other factors that are going to push regulators to regulate some general purpose models more than others. But the use case approach doesn't work as well for general purpose models because of their general purpose nature, right? You might be able to govern GPT-4 in the context of consumer use, but you're not going to be able to lock down every possible adversarial behavior that somebody might want to do with that model in the same way that you have more control over a narrow machine learning model by just limiting its development. So anyway, I think the EU AI Act is going to be a really interesting landmark regulation that influences regulation all around the world. And organizations do need to start getting into compliance because, again, it's on the books.